Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Well, hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Been a couple of days only since we last spoke to you. That's what happens with New Year. Start losing the days and what was wrong. But this is back into our normal slot on a Sunday at noon. And it's great to have you back, and we'll be hopefully sticking to this, as well as midweek specials throughout the year. Just a welcome to you all, and I hope you've all had a great new year. You're all settled up, the hangovers are over, and it's back to old clays and porridge. So to help me out this week are my three musketeers. There's Eva there in Clickmanager.
Hi, Roddy.
Eva, my friend, Roddy. How are you?
Choked with the cold, but not quite back to Alclays and Parrots yet here, because we're in the great setting of Arbroath, reminiscent of the very reason why we do what we do in that great declaration. So I can almost see the Abbey from where we're parked down at the beach. The waves are crashing off the shore, and it's starting to get kind of wild weather, but the sun's shining, so perhaps
you'll go for a swim after the show, will you?
Well, maybe a wee quick dip, aye. A wee hop in.
And how's the weather down there on the borders for you there, Yvonne?
Well, it's very chilly and there's rain, which is why I have my Prism hat on. And yeah, bright and breezy.
Well, and how is the weather in the sunny Côte de Brig? Is it al fresco?
Yeah, it's sunny and it's not too shabby actually. Better than I'm going to be feeling shortly, since I'm heading off to North America near the Canadian border. It's going to be bloody cold there.
Well, for those who didn't see the stuff, it was nice. Phil paid me a visit there during the week, and we had a few sherbets, and we had a wee al fresco moment down beside the Mediterranean.
Magic, nice. Down on the beach.
Yeah, having a nice wee patata bravas and a wee swally. So I keep forgetting, so let me start with a couple of bits of housekeeping before we kick on, which is, if you haven't already subscribed to Through a Scottish Prism, please do it. It means that you won't miss another show when New Year comes or Christmas and we've moved the date. Won't matter. You'll get an email telling you there's a new show out. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And if you like what you hear and what we do, don't forget to hit the like button as well, because that helps us on the algorithms on YouTube to get us up. We're now also on Rumble, and you'll see all the different addresses in the description box below, but we're on Rumble, we're on Spotify, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Have I forgotten any? Anchor, on Anchor. I can just say, our techie told us that from when we started going on video, we used to, I used to do this audio, but from when we went to video, which was to announce the day of the election in 2021, May 2021, to December the 31st last year, on YouTube alone, and that's not including, as I say, all the other platforms I was telling you about, but on YouTube, we've had 1.53 million unique viewers in that time. So congratulations, folks, and to others who have been on the show, special guests and everyone else. That's a lot of viewing, and the numbers are going up all the time. So as I say, you've now got different platforms, Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, that you can watch it on, and please do. So that's me. I've done it. I've remembered for once to do the housekeeping. Guys, I mean, I should also say, when we did our show a couple of days ago, Phil, and you had a wee bit of a rant, shall we say, a bit of the old angry Phil, which the viewers love, on the GRR bill, which we'll be covering again a bit on today. But you did say, we were discussing the possibility that the UK government may strike this down, and I explained I was conflicted, blah, blah, blah. And you did say you would support the Conservatives or the Tory government if they struck this bill down. Now, the reason I say it very carefully is exactly what you said. We have a viewer, and you're probably still here today, Mr. from the Express. Now, could you please, two things could I ask you to do? Accurately report things. And don't forget to mention Through a Scottish Prism when you're taking stuff off of our screen. It's called good manners. And maybe if you told the actual truth and quoted correctly, you'd get more readers instead of the very few that you get. But you never told anyone they should vote for the Tories, Phil.
No, but I didn't say don't either. You know, in fairness, I don't. There are things I agree with the Tories on, and this is one of them. I would support them in this, but I certainly wouldn't encourage voting because the whole package is destructive of our of the best that we can be. It serves us as the greed and the elitists and crushes the working people and crushes most of us, crushes us who are not the elite. But the Express, I mean, I have a level of sympathy with journalists, people who have faith in newspaper and writing and journalism. It was and still is for a reduced number, a very noble profession. To tell the truth, to see what the likes of some of our best journalists like Julian Assange, actually brave, courageous, telling the truth, put yourself in danger. A lot of people don't get the credit for that they deserve. The problem is too many now pander to the instructions, directions of the owners who control the editors, who control the journalists, and that's the sad thing. And because of that, you're now looking at people. The written press is changing. It's all switching to what we do now. So they had 4 million, just under 4 million circulation just in 1947, and decreasing, and it's now under just short under late 22. It was under 200,000 for the Daily Express. You know.
For the year.
That's what you're thinking. Come on.
Hey, we've got a better.
It's
I
like,
think we've got a better, you know.
it's a shame. I feel for journalists, but if you're selling out and you're not being objective, I don't know how else you can earn a crust being a journalist. I don't. I think it's an extremely difficult profession, and I know I met some young journalists when I was in politics, and they were being coerced into saying things they didn't really want to say and doing things they really didn't want to do. So I do have a lot of sympathy for journalists, but only ones that tell the truth.
Yeah, that's journalists. I'm not talking about, in the main, we've got hacks. I mean, journalists like Yvonne and journalists like
Yvonne, exactly.
Or John Pilger. But what we've got working for these tabloids is hacks, house jock hacks. And you know, I think it was Frankie Boyle who said, Yvonne, these people who find themselves totally in agreement with the establishment all the time are not journalists, they're courtiers. And that, I'm afraid, and I hate to attack your profession, and I have the highest regard for journalists, as Phil has described, but we don't have a lot of journalists, do we?
Well, you know, Scotland used to have a brilliant reputation for journalism, and people in England used to aspire to try and get jobs in Scotland. But that reputation has gone right down the pan. And for me, the watershed moment was the coverage from the Alex Salmond trial, which bore no relation to the truth. And the only people who knew for sure what was going on was the jury and Craig Murray. And he ended up in prison for reporting the truth. So, yes, journalism is, I do despair. But I have to pull up on Phil saying that he wants to be fair to the Tories. Excuse me? Fair to the Tories? I can't believe that he's saying that in Coatbridge. It's a wonder people don't swing through the windows and duff them up. The Tories have very few, in fact, I can't think of any terms of endearment for the Tories. And Phil was saying he has sympathy. Well, you know, Phil, sympathy is that word in the dictionary between shit and syphilis. So, you know, let's move on and stop eulogizing the Tories and being fair to journalists. Look, we do have a tough job, but how difficult is it to report accurately what is said on this platform? All the journalist had to do was to go onto YouTube or whatever other platforms they're on, and play the whole Prism show until he or she got it word perfect. But it's good that even the nationals are now starting to take notice of Prism, which, you know, it shows that we do get the beat of the street. We do have our pulse on the fingertips of popular opinion.
Yeah, well, let's long may that continue. Eva, we strive on here to tell it how it is. We don't sugarcoat it, and we're not scared to face subjects. But it is annoying when it's misquoted by the so-called professional press.
Well,
Eva's gone silent.
I think the difficulty I have with all of this. You got me now?
We have now.
I'm not on mute now.
Right, on you go.
Right. The difficulty I have with this is it seems that the press appear to be report fashion. You saw that particularly through the reporting of the GRR bill and this repeated insistence from the First Minister that some elements of the media were happy to liaise with and support, that all that she was responsible for was introducing a minor administrative change. You're seeing similar spin now in relation to the proposal about ending conversion therapy. And all we're asking for is honest, balanced reporting, whereby all sides of a theory or a process or a proposal, the pros and the cons and the views are reported in a manner that is sensible, respectful and informative. And that's all that the Daily Express and anybody else can be expected to do. Quite frankly, there is so much going on in Scottish politics just now that there is no need to sensationalise anything. Everything that's happening in Scottish politics at the moment is actually already extreme, and it doesn't need hyperbole to sell a paper or to hit the front page. You know, there are multiple honest headlines that could be made in relation to the NHS, education, strikes, the cost of living, the fuel crisis, before you get on to gender reform or conversion therapy or any more controversial matters. So it ill behoves the press to be anything other than completely honest and accurate in all their reporting, and that includes in relation to everything that's said here.
I hear. To be fair, I've always there's two things that I find, and I'm sort of on a campaign with it, particularly with the BBC, is their use of language, how they manipulate it. But what I think is not the lying that's done by the media. They don't really do that. It's what they omit to tell us, which I think is the biggest crime. And it's the same with our politicians. What they omit to tell us is always the thing that we should be looking for. And that's what we try to focus on here, what they're not telling you.
Yeah, but more than that, you don't get the job unless you think or operate in an acceptable way to those who would employ you. So there's been many, we've quoted it a few times, the famous quote of you wouldn't be sitting in that chair if you didn't, reporting for the BBC, if you didn't think the way BBC want you to think. Yeah. And it's the same for the Daily Express, it's the same for all these establishment mainstream media publications and outlets. The people in control are owned by those who would keep us on our knees. And that, when I say us and us and them very much applies here, this is back to a kind of class. It's more of an elitist issue now. It really has gone that. I mean, the middle class are getting shafted as well. They're taking longer to come round to it. That's all. And those who really pull the strings, and I'm talking about, we've talked about before, Big Pharma, the big energy companies, but mostly financial services, the financial systems, hedge funds, etc. These are the people that pull the shots. These are the people like Jim Rogers, but particularly George Soros and the Quantum Fund, who did a run on the pound. I think it was about 92. They crashed the pound, private company. And these are the people that are running around the world trying to take over countries, along with those who run the big countries, to privatise healthcare, to take advantage of resources and manipulate people and resources around the world. It's bully boy tactics. It's been around for a long time, and sadly, I know it's much bigger than just telling lies or omitting the truth. You're working to a strategy, and you're told what to say and do, and you don't need a conspiracy here. You just have to act in your own best interests. And for those who are in power, it's about retaining power. It's about keeping people, as George Carlin famously put, and we put up here before. You don't need you don't need to do anything other than keep people stupid, dumbed down and misinformed and misdirected to ensure there's not going to be an uprising. The last thing they want is educated people sitting around the table figuring out why they're getting shafted. And this is why programs like Prism have a place, and is why we're always going to be targeted. It's why the independence campaigners and politicians and parties were targeted immediately, because anyone that threatens the establishment is going to get it, and is going to get it hard. And the problem is that we now face a situation where those that we have elected to represent us in this fight for our freedoms, the people in our country, don't have the courage to stand up against those who would tear them down because they're too scared. Time to move on. This is where it all comes back down to having the courage to stand up and do the right thing. And sadly, our journalists, our politicians, and the majority of those in power, and particularly those who have been successful. I was with some business friends just now in Coatbridge, even in Coatbridge, who voted no. Why? Because we're doing all right, Jank. Thanks very much. Why rock the boat? Why take a risk? That's a valid argument. You might not like it, but it's a valid argument. Why would I take a risk on somebody that's wanting to put GRR in place, who's trying to get all these mad, crazy ideas in communism, when I've got a business to run? It's only now, when you see the destruction by the elite of the small and medium-sized enterprises, and the transfer of their wealth into the corporations and the takeovers, are small and medium-sized enterprise owners and business operators waking up to the fact that actually, in our own country, making our own decisions, maybe I will trust the Scottish people rather than the powers that be in London, because it's not looking good, and it's on a downward trajectory. And the more we can expose that, honestly, openly, and with references, the stronger the independence campaign will be. And that's what we need from our politicians, and that's what we need to continue to do, friends.
I'm going to come to the review for last year and our hopes for next year towards the end of the show. But Phil's touched on it there. The place is falling apart. I mean, probably an easier question is who's not on strike or who's not about to go on strike. Because everyone, it seems, from nurses, doctors, railwomen, porters, teachers, everyone's going on strike. And I absolutely sympathise, not just because I'm an old lefty, but because, for 4, 5, 6, in some cases 10 years, people have not had a pay rise. They've literally had pay cuts. And eventually it's got to that stage now where they can't take any more hits, and they have to stand up for themselves. And I think I highlighted it, I think it was last week's show or the week before, when they said, well, inflation's down, it's great news, it's down to 10.7. But those greedy railway workers are wanting 10%. And it goes back to what we were talking at the start. It's the use of language. One's okay because it reflects on the government, the other, all these greedy workers. But everybody, the UK, not just Scotland, the UK is on the verge of anarchy, is it not?
Not close enough to the edge. I think there are still too many people who are comfortable. And the middle classes, they're feeling slightly squeezed at the moment. But until they're squeezed, until the pips burst, they're not going to get angry. We need people to get angry before we see any signs on the street. And I don't know, frankly, what it's going to take. I mean, our neighbours over the channel, the French, you know, one little thing and they're out overturning tractors and having fires and being unruly and rebellious. Obviously, we don't want to see scenes like that in Britain, but I'm amazed that it hasn't happened already. The boss class do what they do best, which is divide and rule. And they're telling the poor people it's the fault of the strikers. It's the fault of the train workers. It's the fault. I mean, you know, last year we were all clapping the nurses. Now it's why are they going out on strike? And people are dying, and people are dying anyway. The Tories have just about rinsed out the NHS and turned it into something quite worthless. And don't blame the working classes, blame the boss class. And until the working classes and the middle classes actually come together as one and get really angry, we're just going to get the same old SH1T.
I agree. Eva, where I fall down with it, even as a lefty, is I believe in trade unions and the right of people to be in a trade union. The problem I have is that the trade union bosses, the trade union barons, are sending money to the neoliberal, neoconservative Labour Party. They are no longer a Labour Party or a working party. And I don't think until such times as the trade unions disassociate themselves from any political party, and purely for the workers and the people, and then we can all unite behind them. That's how I feel. I don't see how they can be honest brokers in a lot of cases. There are exceptions like Mick Lynch's, you know, different, the Fire Brigade Union, who are not affiliated. These are the good guys. There's too many of them affiliated and are driven by their loyalty to the Labour Party.
Of course they are, but we've seen that since the days of Neil Kinnock. That's the direction that Labour have been heading in. Though, in the context of prices and inflation, here's a little point for you. We were in Ireland, and Northern Ireland, on holiday last week, where a litre of diesel was the equivalent of £1.42 in sterling. And we came back to Scotland, and it's £1.78, £1.80. Why is that? It's because the people of Ireland and Northern Ireland wouldn't let their politicians or the retailers get away with charging as much as we're getting shafted for in Scotland, where we produce it. So I think, you know, as Yvonne's alluded to more than once, the difficulty in the UK, but particularly from our perspective in Scotland, is that people are not getting angry enough. And they're also being spoon-fed lines that the media, as we said before, want them to swallow. If the media were doing their job properly, front page news would be that the real opposition is Mick Lynch and his colleagues in the unions, and that the Labour Party are simply red Tories. But if you look at this from our Scottish perspective through the Scottish prism, what we ought to be seeing in the media and what people should be talking about and what should be front page news and headline on the BBC and the STV is what's happening with enforcing the will of the people for independence, for if not a referendum, then a de facto referendum. You know, we've spoken about this so many times before. We've had the Supreme Court ruling. We've had months of inaction from the SNP. We've now got a promise of a debate in the Scottish Government next week. All of the problems that Scotland's facing just now could be more properly and carefully and economically addressed effectively had we independence. And we're not going to get it if we're led by a government who sit on their hands and periodically talk in terms of a little sop to the masses here and there, where we'll have a meeting, we'll have a wee chat, we'll have some sort of consultation within the party only. Obviously, we've had the first ALBA assembly on this before Christmas. The second one will take place next week. We're going to have had two big open meetings, open to the general public, to assist in formulating policy and direction before the Scottish Government have even got off the starting blocks. These are the issues that ought to be debated in Scotland and be in the media and be addressed appropriately daily.
Yeah, you're right. Just to clarify that, there was the open meeting in Perth where there were people invited from every political party of independence, SNP, ISP, everyone was invited, all the different groups to give their opinions. There'll be a second meeting about that, and then that will be carried forward by the Alba Party to the National Executive Council to formulate policy. That's the way it should be done. Now, the SNP, you're right, should be leading with this, but they're not. I mean, I think the problem is that, as we've heard, there is a strategic vacuum in place with the SNP. Phil, the Supreme Court decision came down, and it upset so many people in Scotland, and it's shown in the figures in the recent opinion polls. But they didn't capitalise on it. They didn't do anything strategic to drive home that dissatisfaction with the Supreme Court. Waiting 88 days is not wise, is it?
Well,
He's going to...
I was just going to
say...
Yeah. Sorry. Remember, it was the 31st of January 2020 that Nicola Sturgeon announced she was going to have a constitutional convention. Why doesn't she set it up to start meeting on the 3rd anniversary of her promise? You know, let's see some real action by elected members who have legitimacy, you know, in a domestic as well as in an international context.
Well, my answer 100%. My answer to you, that Eva, would be that she just says things for the moment. You know, today I can announce a constitutional convention. Today I can announce a not-for-profit energy company. It's all for the moment. But actually goes back to what I said. There is a strategic vacuum, and there's an inability to capitalise on the moments and the events and turn it into a movement. That's my point, Phil.
Yeah, there's missed opportunities that. There's more than just missed opportunities. There's much more behind this than simply a change in what was a very stubborn First Minister. When she came in, she first started to take on initiatives and jump on bandwagons. But she never jumped off a bandwagon. She always stayed stubborn at the beginning. She saw it through and stuck with it and refused to change her mind, even on issues where there was patently obvious insurmountable evidence to the contrary on her position. But she's now started jumping off the odd bandwagon and reneging on promises, which is the sign of the end. It means it's coming to an end. She really is running out of road. The strange one here, though, there's more to this. Why she's so insistent on this GRR, the details, I've lost interest, to be completely honest. I'm just against it, and I want to fight it in any way we can, and I'll support anyone. That's why I said I would even support the Tories if they fought this. We need to remove her, because the GRA is just indicative, and the GRR is just indicative of someone who's been jumping on bandwagons, who's been U-turning more than Tories, which is saying something, because they're the worst for it. On issues that are far more important, as Eva articulated. 3rd anniversary coming up. Why don't you get the convention together? This is what we need. We don't need this GRR. Actually, what the GRR are, who needs the GRR? Well, Big Pharma and those that would divide us. So why are you doing the things that destroy and continue to undermine the independence campaign? And why don't you focus on the issues that can bring us together? That 2014 camaraderie, the broad church that we were. We had the full circle. We had the left and capitalists, and I mean industrial capitalists, not financial capitalists, because they're not on our side. And we had the full circle of every division or every group within our society. We openly welcome. We didn't agree them with everything. We didn't have this pettiness, the egotism that's been allowed to creep in, encouraged and actively fostered by establishment, by other actors in the independence movement that have infiltrated it for their own designs, and clearly the establishment has succeeded in undermining our movement, because the SNP have singularly failed us as the key driving force behind it. They have now reneged on the core principle. That is evident. That is patent. And if you don't see it, it's willful blindness, and there's no excuse for that. The problem is, how do we correct it? And this is where I don't want to get too aggressive, because in any situation, we want to build a country where we can work together and pull all elements together to build a better place for all of us, right? That means you don't destroy. The only people, you use the minimum amount of aggression to fight your corner, so long as you win it. But I don't want to be destroying people. For example, see these GRR people. The difference between us and those who are fighting for this is they're excluding everybody. People have never met. They're discounting feminists and discounting Marxists and discounting leftists who've been fighting injustice all their lives because of an ideology. And yet, because in spite of that ignorance and crassness on their part, I would not exclude them from a unified yes movement moving forward. Why? Because we need all the help we can get, because it's their future too. And I don't blame our children, because they're the ones that are being indoctrinated and lied to and fed all this bullshit. It's our children that are following these ideologies. My kids are follow some of it and lean towards some of it because it's easy. You think you're doing the right thing. I'm a climate change activist. I'm a trans rights activist. I'm on the side of the oppressed and the underprivileged. That's an easy sell. What you've got to watch is the pernicious nature of those who are using it for their own benefit and their own trajectory, which is actually to deconstruct the independence movement and those of us who would unify. So that's why I'm very cautious about being too aggressive with some. I don't think I can be too aggressive from a political point of view with Nicola. She's got to go. That's it. And her and her cabal need to go. And the influence of Stonewall and all of these children, you don't shoot your children. You correct them. You educate them. You instill the courage in them by giving them information. Enable them to think critically, to write, to discuss, to investigate, to think for themselves. That's what we should be doing. So we should be enlightening and talking to these kids. And that's why I'm against being too aggressive against some of them. But others, they've burnt their bridges. They can go. Nicola and her whole cabal, sayonara.
They say hindsight, Yvonne, is the greatest science of all. And we should maybe have had some indication of what was happening when one of the first things that Nicola Sturgeon introduced tried to introduce was the Named Persons Act for children. And that should have been, you look back now, you can see it's a tip for a clue, because we're moving on to soon, I'm going to come on to it in a second, conversion therapy bill that they're talking about. But what's come out news today, for people maybe not heard, I don't know if you've all heard this, but the hate crime bill that the Scottish Government have announced, this great hate crime bill, will not be law before 2024 at earliest, because it's all very well putting it through, and this also applies to the GRR, ladies and gentlemen. So you can put it through Parliament and get it here, but there's a lot of stuff at the back of that, Yvonne, that's got to be pulled together to make sure it's not confronting, or contradicting other legislation, that it's legal, all these things. And they're now finding this hate crime bill easy to put through Parliament, but not easy to enact.
No, well, I think I've given this a lot of thought. Why would Nicola Sturgeon take this route? And one of the things that that maybe we've overlooked is that her predecessor, Alex Salmond, casts a very long shadow. And if you think of Nelson Mandela, who came after him? And very few people can remember, because it's all about legacy. Mm-hmm. And Nicola Sturgeon doesn't want to disappear in Alex Salmond's shadow. This is all that I can think of for her extreme way of thinking. And it is extreme. Her policies are extreme. Of course, the Salmond government was a progressive government. Free education, free health prescriptions, plans for better pensions, lots of really out of the box thinking. And she has to do something quite extraordinary to step out of Alex Salmond's shadows. Well, my goodness, she has done that now, because her legacy is so corrosive and so toxic. People will not forget, people will not forgive. And this is going to be illustrated in the next general election and the Holyrood elections, because her name and the SNP brand is no longer synonymous with independence. I mean, if you mention Alex Salmond's name, people automatically think of independence. It's, you know, that they are linked, indelibly linked. But Nicola Sturgeon's legacy, all people can think of is this GRA, aggressive male to female prisoners, and really negative things. And it's actually, for me, it's reviving. When I first entered journalism in the 70s, there was a foul organization called PI, which was the Paedophile Information Exchange. Whoever thought putting paedophile in a brand? Goodness knows it wasn't a good idea. But PI existed for more than a decade, and they infiltrated respected mainstream media, mainstream politics. There's one headline from 1975 I came across that was in The Guardian that referred to PI supporters as child lovers. That's what they were called in the headlines. This is how much they had penetrated society. And somebody commenting on what's happening in Scotland said, PI has never gone away. It's just reinvented itself. And it's all about the emperor's new clothes. And I'm just waiting for somebody high up in the Scottish government to blow the whistle and say, hang on, the emperor is stark bollock naked. Is that going to happen? I don't know. But I think this is how she came to veer so much off course. And now we're further away from independence than ever. And you can feel it when you go around, you know, if you remember the atmosphere in the week leading up to the independence referendum, I really thought we were going to get it because it was everywhere. Saltires were everywhere. Free Scotland signs and yes signs were everywhere. And there was just such a buzz. You go around towns now and you can almost see the tumbleweed going up the main street. It's so depressing. We need to get angry again. We need to get out of our comfort zones and start pushing the establishment and start pushing the authorities. And one of the first things that I think will happen is our beloved Prism will come under attack. Because you now are achieving better viewing figures than some of BBC Scotland's mainstream programmes.
Okay, that's something to look forward to.
Well, the 9 last year, I was told, had they didn't keep the figures because they were too embarrassing, that it was around 15,000 and below.
I have to see. It's absolutely right, Eva. It seems that the SNP has moved over from independence to social engineering. It seems to be the most important thing. And while they can't get, they never get through the Named Persons Act. The hate crime bill is in troubled waters because it's they put it off for a year. But no sooner has the ink dried on the GRR, which has got a long way to go, and there's challenges coming to that. We don't know if the UK government are going to refer it back to, to bring in a section 35 and just, no, you're not getting it, or send it to the Supreme Court, which probably is the Tories' best move. And they're already now talking about this, the Greens are leading with it. We're going to bring in later this year a conversion therapy bill to stop any kind of conversion therapy. And when you look at the advisory paper I've had on it, it is the scariest thing yet, is it not?
Well, two things to bear in mind. The self-identification and the refusal to accept sensible amendments to the GRR bill, such as those we spoke about before, proposed by Michelle Thompson and Russell Finlay in relation to sex offenders. The refusal to accept those amendments and conversion therapy or conversion practice, defined as it appears to be, are both prices or the cost of the SNP pact with the Greens, which keeps the SNP in control of the Scottish Parliament without having to worry about defections or the opposition. So we have got the tail wagging the dog. Now, if you set that to one side and look in the round comprehensively at various developments that have happened in the law under Nicola Sturgeon's watch, what you'll see is that in the context of the named person, for example, there was very robust legal advice given to the Scottish Government, and they lost that case, and they eventually had to, in effect, withdraw the legislation, despite the fact that named person had been piloted in a number of areas before it had even been approved and then rejected. So named person was never going to work. They were warned it wasn't going to work, and they wouldn't listen. They were then subsequently informed that there were issues in relation to trying to pass legislation regarding the rights of the child and have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child embodied in effect into all new Scottish legislation. That case went to court and they lost that one too. And again, they were warned they would lose it. In the GRR bill, we know perfectly well that there will be challenges, and there will be challenges in the Scottish Parliament as well as elsewhere. The hate crime bill cannot currently be implemented because all those agencies and organisations who quite properly expressed concerns about its wording and its impact continue to express those reservations. And I understand that the police in particular, and maybe Phil knows more about this than I do, don't really know how they're going to begin to implement its provisions. So I don't actually believe that the GRR bill will ever be implemented, and I hope that I'm right. I don't believe that it's going to be easy to implement the hate crime bill or act, but the issue here arises from what kind of country is Scotland, and what kind of country is the current Scottish Government trying to turn us into? Because the issue with a lot of the transgender stuff is to do with overriding parental consent, withholding information and knowledge from parents. There's a similar difficulty, and it's the most obvious, most telling one, with the proposals in relation to banning conversion therapy. What it is said there, and this is a Scottish Government report, this is not sensationalism by the press, it's not sensationalism by Wings Over Scotland or any other commentators, it's the hard, fast truth in black and white on the Scottish Government website that parents who refuse to affirm children who have chosen a different gender from the one they were born with may lose their parental rights. Now, that cannot possibly have been a proposal put by somebody with anything like a robust knowledge of the law as it relates to parental rights and parental responsibilities. But it seems like it's right wing and it's fascist. And to talk about removing a parent's parental rights over the children, in effect, mean removing children from the care of their family, when again you've got a Scottish government which has said, in the context of the Independent Care Review, that the best place for children to be brought up is safely within their own family, and that all efforts should be made to keep them there within the bosom of a loving, caring family where they are not at risk. All of these different things don't all act together to give us the kind of Scotland that we want. So I think it's important for viewers to remember that at the moment, there is private law and public law as regards children. Private law covers disputes between parents and carers. Public law currently narrates the circumstances where the state can step in. And at the moment, the state can step in relative to arrangements for children if they are considered to be at risk. And in that event, the children can become referred to the Children's Panel. Now, the Children's Panel was set up after the Kilbrandon Report, which was written in 1964. I was 1.5 years old when it came out. And the Kilbrandon Report, leading to the setting up of the Children's Panel, was groundbreaking, internationally renowned worldwide as being a first-class, child-centred arrangement. So, whoever it is that has proposed, and I know there's a committee, you can find it online, you can see the membership of this committee. I think that they're appointed by the Scottish Government. We don't know what their experience or understanding or knowledge is unless we Google them or we read Wings Over Scotland. I understand that perhaps one of this committee might be legally qualified. They'll have a legal advisor. But what they clearly don't understand is that as the law stands at present, without tinkering with conversion therapy or threatening to remove parental rights, children at risk can be referred to the reporter, and the reporter to the panel can convene a panel, and panel members will decide on the basis of accurate information where parents have an input, whether or not the children need any measures of supervision, whether they can stay at home or whether they should be moved elsewhere. There is no need for extreme measures and, in effect, dramatic moves that have been suggested by people who really wouldn't know one end of the Children's Scotland Act from the other. And that's what's wrong. We've got a country governed now by people who run off at the mouth with grandiose ideas about how they're going to tackle problems that, if they exist, need very careful, sensitive, sensible management, not hyperbole and exaggeration, and not, the amateur dramatics that you're seeing coming out of this committee now, whereby you talk about parents who want to sit with their children and say, hold the bus. This is a big step that we're talking about. That parent would be criminalised if these recommendations are enforced, and they also risk the removal of their children from their care. Never did I think I would see that day. And again, that position will end up in court if it's pursued at greater cost to the Scottish public than is necessary or desirable.
This report they've received, Phil, has suggested that, as Eva's alluded to, that if the parents sit down and say, well, I don't think this is for you, I don't think, changing your sex is probably a good idea, you could be criminalised. If there are religious people and they take them to see their pastor, of whatever religion, and the pastor tries to help them, the pastor could then be done breaking the law and be criminalised. If they go to see a doctor or a psychiatrist to investigate them, the doctor or psychiatrist. Now, for God's sake, I'm not a genius by any manner of means, but none of that sounds logical, fair, sensible, or necessary more than anything. It doesn't sound necessary. Surely it's parents, above all, till the age of consent, that children should have the greatest rights over their children.
Absolutely, and that's, there are families that you do have to take the kids off them, obviously, and that would be the exception, but it's not the rule. This is not an exaggeration. What you're saying, what Eve articulated, what I've once talked about, is perfectly articulated by, and this is where it comes back to broken clocks being correct twice a year or whatever. I don't agree with everything that Roddy Dunlop says, but he actually agrees with Wings Over Scotland in this, and this is what people should read. Wings Over Scotland's article, the Rev, on the 4th of January, raise all of the flags. Read it and weep, people, because it's now going to be illegal to suggest as a parent to your own child that maybe it's a bad idea to get breasts or genitals cut off, and that just because you as a child feel that might be what you want. I mean, Germaine Greer, I'm paraphrasing, just because you lop off your bollocks doesn't make you a woman. You know, just as her getting long ears, liver spots, and wearing a brown coat doesn't make her a cocker spaniel. I mean, the specifics in this. And if you go into the legislation, what the Reverend Stu does is he always does. He's excellent. He's still the best forensic journalist we've got. He goes right into detail and he shows the evidence. He's brilliant. Big, huge respect to him for still standing up and saying what's right. He lists and analyses who's on this committee that put this forward. These clowns should not be allowed anywhere near legislation.
Shouldn't be allowed anywhere near children either.
Oh, it's horrendous. The conversion practices, so the report recommends a definition of conversion practices to be included in the law, including of any critique of expression or gender expression. So if you critique the gender expression of your child, it's in breach of this law. That's what they want to do, and they go on to say you are not permitted any form of I'm quoting from Wings. Many form of conversion which might resolve that issue other than by affirmation of your new identity. I'm Luke Skywalker, of course you are. Of course you are. I'm Napoleon Bonaparte, of course you are. I mean, you're children's games, but you're a boy, but you actually want to be a girl. You're not allowed to say, well, actually. I mean, this group does not consider, this is what they say, these specialists don't consider exceptions are necessary for its recommended definitions of conversion practices. That means there's no, even a casual remark, just as we've said, the group believes that where the perpetrator has parental or guardianship rights in relation to the victim, the legal consequences ought to include the modification or withdrawal of such rights. That's what they say. That's exactly what they say. This is not exaggeration. We should be knocking three different colours of crap out of these idiots. They're damaging and hurting our children. Who the hell? I mean, you can understand the pain of growing up and the anguish of being in the wrong body or being gay and the persecution and the suffering and the pressures, all of this. But life ain't easy, guys, right? It's not easy for anybody. Life is suffering. It's tough. But you don't wrap them in cotton wool. You encourage children to deal with the difficulties in life. And this crap, this is playing right into the hands of those who want access to children. That's what this is doing. And that must not be permitted at any cost. At any cost.
I agree.
And as a father, I'm prepared to do what I'm prepared to do to stop it.
I agree with you in everything you've said, and I agree with what you say about Wings. I'm so delighted that he's back. Of course, they're now saying he's a Tory and he's MI5 because he's exposing this thing. And he's anti-independence. And he ate my hamster one time after putting it in the barbecue. You know, I mean, a lot of nonsense. But, you know, it gets worse and worse, Yvonne. They do not want to. I put an open invitation to anyone who believes this conversion therapy bill that's been being proposed to come on and we'll debate it. And of course, I've been attacked, and you know they won't come to my show because you know you're all these things. But here, let me ask you a question: isn't taking a young girl and giving her a double mastectomy, is that not a form of therapy, a conversion therapy? You're converting her from a female to a male. So would that not be? Does that not mean their law? They would be breaking the law. You see, let's go get your breasts cut off, love. Is that different?
Well, if you reverse it and you get a 12-year-old going to her parents saying, I want to look like Jordan and I want a massive big rack, then that would be roundly condemned by everyone. So why wouldn't the same happen in the reverse? I just think that parents have sleepwalked into this legislation. I don't think until they're actually confronted with it that they realise what they've signed up to. And I'd like to think that, I mean, here in the Borders, the most precious thing in the house is a horse. And if this legislation was applied to horses, they would be getting their ploughs and picks and shovels and marching on Holyrood. And the same if it was for pedigree dogs as well. That would get people at marching. This is our children. And people are hearing what's happening, but I just think that they don't believe it. They don't believe that their little Johnny or Joanna or whatever is going to come and say, I want a mastectomy, I want breast implants. It's just so far away from most people's minds that they just think, oh, it's never going to happen to me.
That's what I was going to say. Exactly what I just wrote down there. That, you know, it's the same with poverty. And it's the same, you know, with hunger and food banks. And we're saying we need to do something, but we all have to get angry about it. And they're going, well, you know, here in Bearsden, here in Morningside, you know, that doesn't affect us. And it won't affect any of our family, any of our friends, or anyone up the polo club or the golf club. And it's the same with this. Well, I mean, if they want to go and change it, it's not going to happen in our family. We're all very normal. So no one in our family. That is the problem, Eva. They're so self-centered that they don't see this affects the whole of society. Are you still with us, Eva? Have we lost you? I think we've maybe lost her. Oh.
I think she's been zapped by MI5.
Could be. Well, let me put that to you, Phil.
Well, you'd have to repeat it.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of these people who are, you know, the middle classes type that think that this conversion won't affect them, just the same as food banks don't, and unemployment and poverty and losing your home because they're all right. And it's the all right, I'm all right jacks that are the problem for everything, including our independence.
Yeah. It's a common theme, and it's the loss of community. If you look at the remote parts of Scotland, that community feel is still there. People still look out for each other. In poorer communities, this is what we talk about the Gini coefficient. You know, it's not poor poverty that causes crime. It's when they see the poor people see the guy just up the streets driving about in a Rolls Royce and he's getting persecuted and prosecuted, and he's thinking, well, it's not a fair game here. I'm not getting a fair crack, and more importantly, my children are not getting a fair crack at the whip. So no, it's bringing it home. How do you bring it home without the pain? And this is why I felt after the 2014 loss, that hollowness we all felt. At the end of that, I felt, well, bring it on then. Because I know what's going to happen. We're going to get shafted here. In fact, there was a wee guy in George Square that articulated.
I will embrace it. I will embrace it.
Aye, and he's bring it on. And I felt before that's exactly how I felt, but he articulated it for me very well because I saw it and I thought, you're right. That's exactly how I feel and exactly what I was saying at the time. Bring it on, because it's the only way you're going to get it into people's heads that this is affecting us. And what I touched on earlier about small and medium-sized enterprises, it's the same way as what Starbucks did to the coffee shops in Seattle. You're getting pushed out. They pay no tax. You can't compete. I don't use Starbucks. I don't use Costa. You're not going to get any sponsors for these guys. I don't use Nero. I use local coffee shops. I don't use these big shysters that are registered in Ireland or somewhere else and have got accounts, executives, tax accountants to avoid tax and send monies offshore. There's lots of games that are played. Our system is not a fair system. It's corrupt, and it suits the City of London and those that would take advantage. So the corporations aren't affected by this, but more and more of the middle classes are being affected. Profits are down, Brexit, you've got the whole COVID crisis, and you've got some help during that, but people are thinking, well, unless my business can maintain, and look at the amount of businesses that are going out of business. Look at the empty shops. Look at the problems that more and more in our provincial towns and villages, that the more they're suffering. And as I said before, if the corporations are feeding you, clothing you, housing you, educating you, looking after your healthcare, you're screwed. You're eating shit. You're not going to get looked after at all. What we need is a sense of community. We need to put our own house in order and look after our own. And that includes everybody who lives and works in Scotland. But we need to do it right by the rules, and we need to team up and get together on this, because if we don't, we're allowing those who would keep us on our knees to divide us, and by dividing us, they can defeat us.
I hope you're back with us, Eva. We're coming to the end. The clock is beating us again, and I still haven't done a review of 2022 and what's going to happen in 2023. But I'd just like to do one thing, Eva, if I may, is that we need to move forward. As we said, we need a constitutional convention. We need to have a strategic think. We need a paper that tells us how we're going to do it and which way we're going to move forward. I heard the cracking thing is the best way to make it important, to make it sound and really get people's attention, is to collapse the parliament, not wait for the next election. Collapse it, and collapse it early to let the people know this is important and this is what we've got to do. And the date mentioned for collapsing it was so that we could have the election for the Holyrood Parliament in October this year, which is in the same day as we hope to have the referendum. I think it's a fabulous idea. What do you think? Tell Matt to pedal faster.
Not just to resign. Have you got me now?
I've got you now.
Well, if the First Minister resigns and there is not a new First Minister within 28 days, there has to be a Scottish election. We've said this before. It's easily achieved. Nicola Sturgeon can set up the Constitutional Convention at the end of this month. She can wait a few weeks. She can then resign. The SNP and the Greens then have a pact not to elect any other First Minister and to vote down any other nominations as First Minister, stay in that position for 28 days, and the presiding officer is required to call a Scottish election. That election can be a de facto plebiscite, making use of the Scottish electoral register, whereby Europeans and children 16 and over can vote, and we can have that on the 19th of October 2023. And when it's a de facto plebiscite, which will have a majority for independence, we can achieve the hashtag #FreeIn23. No ifs, no buts.
Here. And that's exactly what we've got to do. And the way we're going to do that, folks, is we're going to have to agitate, we're going to have to demonstrate, we're going to have to put pressure on everything and everyone. As our friend Yvonne here says all the time, you need to get angry. We need angry people. Be like Angry Phil. Make Angry Phil your role model and get angry. Ladies, gentlemen, again, time, not the agenda's beating us. At the beginning of this week, folks have said, no parliament, we might struggle a wee bit, but we never seem to. That's the joy of talking to like-minded people here. Thank you very much. And to you who are watching us, welcome back to the regular time slot. It'll be this time every week from here on in. Until we see you next week at this time, please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.